had lots of, exciting experiences globally, and really kind of cemented ourselves in UK music history. At that time, there were not many black male R&B bands, and certainly not achieving the success that we achieved in a British, predominantly white male industry. So that's background to Damage. There's much more, but that's a short synopsis.
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant synopsis. Thank you very much for honouring this invitation. I didn't realise you were in hospital, so thank you for that. I
Of
really
course, of
appreciate
course.
that. We do appreciate that. Tell us a bit about your background. Tell us about you. Where were you brought up? How many
Yeah.
siblings? Things like that.
All right. Well, I think this is good because it will hopefully lead us to
Yeah,
later discussions about the work that I do.
it
So
will. It will. Yes.
I'm an only child, originally from Northwest London, Stonebridge.
Yeah, I know
Um,
Bridge.
yeah, love Stonebridge. Left there when I was maybe about 4 years old. My parents split up, unfortunately. But both parents have still been a key role within my life growing up. My mum moved me over to Lewisham, where I was raised mainly, lived in Brockley for the rest of my life, or the rest of my adolescent period going into my early adulthood. School was fine for me. Primary was fine for me. I'm a child of the kind of late 70s, early 80s. So secondary school in the 90s, which ties into the work that I do, because I always use that as a benchmark for when I think serious youth violence and young people specifically becoming involved in very serious violence. The early 90s was really a watershed moment for us. That's where we started to realize that there was a lot going on, not just in Lewisham, but pan London. In most of the boroughs of London throughout the 90s, there was a real uptake in this kind of behavior. And it wasn't just from the children, it was various things that were going on, which was contributing to that.
Mm, yeah. So so you told us a bit about your background, but what was life like for you that made you want to go down the route of what you're doing now?
Well, after I came back from traveling the world, I came back to the borough of Lewisham, and my friends had gone three ways. One, they were, living law-abiding lives. They had beautiful families, and they were doing really well. Some, unfortunately, had a relationship with the criminal justice system where they would go between custody and the community and bounce back and forth. And then some, unfortunately, were no longer alive.
Mhm.
And I realized that we'd been blessed with the opportunity to travel. It wasn't given to us. Damage is not something that was put together by Simon Cowell or the X Factor. We put that together ourselves in our bedroom and went on and sold 2 million albums at the time. And as I said, being a black band at the time, it was not easy for us to get the recognition or even to get the record deals. But when I came back to Lewisham after traveling the world and I started seeing just young people generally around, I wanted them to realize there was more than their borough. I wanted them to realize that they could travel the world. If they had the opportunity, they should go and see places, right?
Yes.
So I kind of had, when I first came into the youth justice sector, I had a hero mentality. All they need to do is just meet us. Once they meet us and once they find somebody like me as a mentor, they'll be fine. And I
Mm.
located many of the issues within young people and looking at the behavioral change which is needed in young people, or let's say children, because I don't really like to use the word young people too much.
Yeah.
Once I started working in the system, I spent nearly 10 years in the Lewisham Youth Offending Service in various roles. And once I did that, I realized that this issue, part of it is the behavior of children, but the bigger issue is the structural and systemic stuff, underpinned by poverty, underpinned by racism, underpinned by just being disenfranchised. And I started to look at, just historically how systems maintain the right social conditions to keep these children coming through the system. And that's where I became fascinated. I went off and did my first degree in criminology and sociology. Um, and then really started specializing in working with what we call high risk, high harm, and highly complex children and young adults.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about the high risk, complex young adults that you've met. Has their scenario always been the same, or just a few differences here and there?
No, I mean, there's you have a real acute side, which is people who have grown up in environments that they have just witnessed too much. They've been, I don't know the age of the participants on at the moment. If there's any young children, please, I'll try and be mindful about what I'm saying, but there are some children who have just been exposed to too many forms of abuse, emotional, psychological, physical, sexual, etc.
Mm.
They have witnessed too many domestic violence incidents. They have grown up with just not having their basic needs met. They have been neglected. And that's not just by their birth family, that's by the system as a whole. And then you've got children who have grown up in beautiful homes with families that have done everything they can. They've worked extremely hard. Um, they've held multiple jobs. They've raised their children with, the right morals. They know good from, wrong from right. But sometimes just the geographical location of where a family lives, even if they own their home, they can still live within close proximity to children who once again are experiencing some of the aforementioned things. And when you get a child who is being raised in a home which is structured, their peer group, they still have to mix with peer groups, going to and from school, associating in the park, whatever it is. And then just generally, when you're growing up through adolescence anyway, as a child, you want to test different boundaries. And within that, that's where some of the children who you'd be surprised that, mother's a lawyer, father's a doctor, but the child's now in custody for a very serious offense. That's how some of that stuff happens.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's true. I think the media conveniently portrays it as children of where the parents are single parents, council house parents. They live in a council house state. It's not true. It's all stratas of society. They come from good homes.
Yeah, I mean, look, you have to have in every society, you have to have a problem group, right? And a problem group allows society to project into them the ills of wider society. So within all aspects of society, whether it's white collar crime, right down to the front line on the streets, there's criminality. When you have problem groups, white collar crime individuals who are losing billions or involved in things which are really serious, fraud, etc., or violence, murder, etc., they're able to project this stuff into a smaller group of individuals and say, this is the people we need to focus on. These are the people that are causing the most harm. And really, it's a problem within society. The way the children that I work with have become, have kind of come out of our society. They're all under the age of 18, generally, the children that we work with in our organization. And the stories that they will tell you and the experiences that they've had, no child in a British society should be experiencing that. They shouldn't be experiencing these things.
Yeah. So how do you help them in terms of what you do?
So I began the Liminality Group in 2013, and the word liminal, it really speaks to this middle passage of ambiguity. So a place of where you're coming from, and then a place of where you're going to, and in that middle passage, that's that liminal space. And most of the children that we work with and organizations that we work with are in that liminal space, right? They're not really sure about what they need to do next. So I started to look at the system as a whole after spending nearly 10 years in a youth offending service, thinking about where we could have the most impact. One is early intervention and prevention. So going into schools and working specifically with children who are most at risk of being excluded. And we identify them through, if they have intergenerational offending within their families, if they're known to statutory services already, if they've had multiple fixed term exclusions and they're one step away from a permanent exclusion. We work with those children, delivering deterrent messages through a program. And then in non-term time, we take them on residentials, or we partner with the private sector to give them work experience opportunities. What we're trying to do with our early intervention and prevention is stem the flow of children being put into pupil referral units.
Yes.
Pupil referral units are one step away from custody.
That's right.
All right. The second part of the organization, I then started to look at the work in custody, and that's where we do the majority of our work now. So we work in secure training centres with the younger children, and then young offender institutions with the 15 to 18-year-olds. We deliver offending behaviour programs underpinned by CBT principles, psychologically informed, and just really helping them to look at adverse childhood experiences and how these may contribute to their thinking and behaviour. Yeah. Also helping them to understand the system around them historically. Also helping them to think about how they deploy their skills in the future. And then we provide access to employment for some children who are eligible based on their age when they come home. But in doing both of those approaches, it became very clear that unless you work with the staff, so from the head teacher in a school and governors right down to the front line, the cleaner in a school, and then in the prison context, unless you're working with the governor right down to the people at the gate, you're not really working in a holistic manner. Everybody has to understand how you work with these children. So we do a lot of training for staff.
Oh, that's good.
And our training is really thinking about, kind of psychoanalytic perspectives about how they view children, how they view themselves, why they're in role, what their role means, and also how we kind of ensure that these children get the best service that they need.
Wow, excellent, excellent. And how much time do you spend training staff?
I mean, I can't put it in hours, but
Yeah.
I think per annum, pre-COVID, we were definitely doing about 200 or 300 prison staff, social workers, police officers, school teachers as a whole. To date, we've probably worked with about 600 young men in custody, and maybe about 100 young women and girls. But remember, we're working with the high risk, high harm, and high complexity children. So although the numbers are small, it's not thousands, we're working with the perpetrators of many of the offences that people see on the television and the news.
And what is their response to you wanting to help them? Because as you say, they're high risk. There's a lot going on in their lives.
I mean, when I use the term high risk, it's, you'd still come into a room with the child and they're still a child,
Of course,
beautiful
of course.
children.
Yeah.
So high risk, it just suggests that some of their behavior
Yes.
could cause a risk of harm to themselves and to other people. They're not in a room with horns growing out of their head.
Of course they're not. No.
And I say that all the time because I'm trying to normalize children.
Yes.
Even some of the children I work with who are 16 and they will not be home now until their early 40s, all right, because of the offense they've committed.
Yes.
They're still children, and we never take away the responsibility of the offense because there is a victim, and the ripple effect will go on for generations.
Yes.
But when I tell you the stories of the children in custody, you would have to put the onus back on the state, not just the family, but the onus back on the state to say, how are these children being raised in environments, attending schools that they attend? How are they getting to this stage? Because the final act is the violent act, but it's everything that precedes that where so many adults have let them down.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a very interesting point you've made, to see them as children, because I did some training for HMPPS, and I said that I was in court one day, and this PLO, and she's a really nice woman, but she was so happy that they finally caught a drug user, and I was looking to see who it was, and it was Mark Duggan's son. But she was so happy about it, and I was thinking, but that's somebody's child. Why is she happy about that? Nobody's born a drug user, or these labels that are given to them.
So look, the wider discussion that we have with children and staff, when we think monetarily of the system, we spend £13 billion per annum on reoffending and the prison system. 13 billion.
Yeah.
That means there are companies, auxiliary companies, who make profit off of this, right?
Yes.
The drug industry in the UK alone is worth £9 billion per annum.
Wow.
And I say that to stress that, because when you see a child who's got £4,000 in their house because they've been selling a little bit of drugs here and there, or they know somebody who's made $500,000, or they know somebody on the street who's got 1.5 million, because these figures are around, we all know this.
Yes.
I don't know anybody who has made $1 billion from the drugs industry in the UK. So the conversation is not about why are children selling drugs. The conversation is, we live on an island. How is £9 billion worth of drugs coming into the United Kingdom? And why is it finding its way into the hands of our children?
Exactly. I think that's a wider question people need to ask. So, yeah. Thank you for throwing that out there. I think some parents will need to think about that. How is it coming? And why they're the ones always ending up in prison?
Yeah, I mean, I know we know the answer to the question, but these are the things, when you're standing in front of a room of, head councils, directors of councils or head teachers or social workers, or police officers, and you throw out those figures and you say, this is an industry. If I had a magic pill tomorrow and I could stop every child offending, do you think that?
Mm. Would that be possible? Yeah. Okay, great. Um, what would you like to share with the parents? How can
Coming.
they sort of like be more aware of what their children are doing, and how can they help their children?
Sorry, my internet's just got a bit funny. Say that again,
Uh,
please.
yeah, I was going to say, what would you like to share with the parents as to?
Well, it's what I'm look. First of all, sometimes when we talk about these things, it can feel quite depressive. It's not. There are hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands and millions of children in the United Kingdom who are doing phenomenally well. All right.
Mm.
And there are so many parents who are doing really well with their children in difficult circumstances. It's a small minority of children who are getting involved in high level offending. Even though you see it on the news, even though you see the figures on the newspaper, it's a small minority. There are only 80,000 people in custody in prison at any one time, and that number fluctuates. In terms of the youth population, it's far, far less. So for parents currently, you have to get into the culture there. For many years, parents have been oblivious to the culture of youth. And I don't mean the culture is in what trainers they wear. That's just too obvious. There is a culture which is underpinned by information technology. The world has changed. There is a culture which is underpinned by, historic murders within the United Kingdom, not just London, across the whole of the UK, also back in some of our home countries. There is a history that as a parent, you have to Google, you have to go on your computer at night and start building up your own toolbox of knowledge so you can help your child. And some of the pressures that the children experience when they're out in the community. If your child comes home and says to you, I have a teacher who's targeting me, we have to explore these things properly, because that can be the difference between your child deliberately trying to get out of that school and behaving in a specific way, which can lead to a pupil referral unit because they're being targeted by a teacher. That's the root cause of it.
Mm-hmm.
And just going back to my point, it's just, there are so many parents that I work with, especially African and Caribbean parents, who, when I meet them in custody with their children, the stories the kids tell me compared to what the parents knew about their child, it's a complete gulf. It's completely different. And you have to start getting to grips with what your child is, thinking, speaking, what their interests are, what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
There's been so many, so many parents have taken the drastic action, which works for some, to send children back to our native countries. For some people, it has worked, but for some children, it doesn't work. When they come home, they're even more traumatized than when you sent them in the first place.
Yeah.
So I think for parents, there is no one solution, because I'd be a billionaire if I could just tell you the one solution. But what you do have to do is do your research and respect the youth culture. The youth culture is not something to be played with. Mm-hmm. It's not something that is, kind of just, here today and gone tomorrow. It's one of the most complex, hierarchical, structured youth cultures, in my opinion, in history, because it's been impacted by information technology in a completely different way. Mm. When we were all younger, and I can see with various ages, your youth group was pretty much where you lived.
Yeah.
And when the mobile phone came in, that stretch from where you were to maybe across London, your children have instantaneous access to information that you have never seen before. So you have to be doing your research. You have to sit down with your children and have those conversations. And you have to be flexible. You have to remove some of the old school ways of thinking about how you resolve issues. The home must always be a place where your child can come. Yeah. If no matter what they're doing and what they're doing on the roads, you have to create a space where your child can come. Obviously, if they're, committing criminal acts, which warrant a criminal justice response, that's a different story. But the home needs to be a loving space. Yeah. There needs to be food there. There needs to be love in the home. Then, these are the things that need to happen. I often say to last point, and you can move me on, but I often say to the boys and the girls that they are bypassing their childhoods and they're becoming adults too quickly.
Yes.
Now, many of them are doing it intentionally, but many of them didn't want to. They speak about their parents having 3 or 4 jobs, which parents have to do sometimes.
Yeah.
But when you have 3 or 4 jobs, you cannot supervise your child. You cannot do the homework. You cannot, be there to check how their day was. You know, if they got off the bus and somebody tried something with them, they can't project that into you when they come home and you resolve that. So, you know, there are so many children who are becoming adults too